Yep. All right. Hello, everyone. It's RPG with DBJ. I have my co-host, Vincent. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Vincent Schein, also known as Johannes. I'm an RPG writer, and I talk with DBJ a lot, and I help him a bit with these topics as long as I can. So, yeah, it's been fun so far.
Yep. And I am a contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing. And for those who don't know, we still come out with things. So if you've seen the promo for this video, there's like a big skeletal face or something. That's called The Lich, or more specifically, Blasphemous Abominations, The Lich. That book is for release now in hardback. It's a 100-page book, just all about being one, creating them, how to defeat them, random tables, that kind
out
of
of interest, why is it called this primarily title and then the Lich? Do you want to make more of them?
It's the maybe depending on its success, right? Or if there are other ideas in the kitchen, getting ready to cook and be ready for baking.
Well,
so
there are lots of monsters which could contribute to a complete book.
Yeah,
Beholders and Mind Flyers, for example, the most classic ones.
Yeah. Now the hard part is the legalese in it. Dungeons and Dragons owns like the Mind Flayer and Illithid.
Betrayer,
they own the Beholder, and there's a number of them. If you take a look at the OGL, it actually specifically says like there's specific names of fiends, otherworld creatures as well.
And the Lich was not blocked?
No. Okay. No, it is a historical, open license historical thing. Like Norse gods, Thor cannot be copywritten. They own the background. They don't own the name. So you can the idea of a magic wielding undead creature. They can't own that.
I would be interested what part of these monsters they actually own. If you would reskin them slightly, would this still be considered? Right. We shouldn't get too much into that.
I know. Yeah, it's like the argument of like displacer beasts and things like that. Like they don't own Blink Dog, but they own displacer beasts, and I was like, wait, what? I don't get that. So, but it's a thing, and also it's branding too, right? If it's part of your world, you want it to be, you don't want other things coming in. By the way, I'm segueing. Rickard, hey, anyone else here? Anyway, well, we're here.
We are here.
Yeah, you're by yourself there, dude. Okay, so we we are getting into the third class in world building. So the point of this video is that we are going to talk about building a world where the majority of the world has been shaped and ruled and manipulated by a particular character class, and just delving into some of the nuances. And so today, of course, we're going to talk about the cleric. Now, we had a little preamble off video talking about the cleric. So the one thing we're going to get rid of right away is not just a stereotype, but something we've already done before, and that is religious wars. We're just going to we understand what they are, we know it is, but it's
there are simply some things that are too obvious and maybe done to death. For example, a world controlled by a cult would also not be really interesting, and something that simply copies the Catholic Church would also not be really interesting. So we just rule them out just to make things a little more interesting.
Yeah. I just feel like it's something. I believe it's useful in a GM's toolbox. I just feel like it's an old tool in a new world, and it's far too easy to fall back on that, to just have a bunch of regions or factions in these holy wars. but useful as a backdrop, maybe. Um, but I feel like there are things that we absolutely positively haven't even touched on when it comes to clerical powers and role playing. So I think if we take this in a smaller realm, um, um, not smaller, but instead of an external force, we're going to have these big eternal these religious wars. I think turning inwardly would be better.
Yeah. The interesting thing about it is also that in most settings I know, the gods are either not very interested in what the humans actually do, or they are a force for themselves inside the world. There are only these two extremes in most settings, and I think it would be interesting to have something like a gods or godlike beings which are interested in the humans but are not interacting with them directly. They just give them orders or try to use their powers sometimes, but not all the time. So you are still in the unknown, what exactly you are about, what you have to do, but you still have to obey these powers somehow. So you can create conflict within a setting.
Yeah, I think one of the fallacies I brought up before with you in role playing games is that if there are divine beings and people given divine power, that there's also this idea of perfect understanding, and I don't. The two are absolutely exclusive of one another. Someone being granted or people praying to receive a gift of some sort does not necessarily mean that they completely that these godlike beings, these divine powers, communicate with mortals in a um, in a very basic I'm going to let you understand what I'm talking about kind of manner. And so we brought up some of those things. Rickard says there's a difference between world building for clerics and world building for a religion heavy world. And I absolutely agree with that. The non-clerics of the world would be just as either enthralled with those divine beings or have a moral complication with those divine beings just as everyone else would be, right?
Yeah. The
You know,
thing is that the clerics are usually the most involved into these things because they are basically like the person who has to tell everyone else what the divine being wants to do. That they are basically the bridge, the connection to between those two extremes, between those two worlds, and then yeah.
one of the things that this sparked in my head, and it has always bothered me slightly about Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, it's got its own game rules, but one of the issues that clerics have in that role playing game is that they're granted these powers, and uh, there are no rules from each specific religion as to how those powers are used or the repercussions of using or abusing those abilities.
Oh, because you mentioned that, as I told already, I really don't like the Dark Eye too much, but they have some interesting ideas. And in the Dark Eye, there are 12 primarily gods. And these 12 gods each have unique clerics. They're called the Blessed Ones. And each of them has their own rules, has their own spells. They are very distinct from one another, and they also play like a different class almost, each one of them. They have some similarities. They have some blessings which are true for every one of them, but for the most part, they are very different. And I think that would be really true for polytheistic religion. Why should everyone have the same spells in minus those granted by the domain? I think there should be a larger difference between the different clerics. Maybe even that it's common to multi-class for a specific cleric.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand that for gaming purposes, a cleric fits a specific role as the support, the healer, and so through legacy, it's remained that way. and then they've been able to, I believe by like the midway through like second edition or maybe third edition, they started coming up with domains, clerical domains, where they are given each of the divine powers gives them a few things that separates them from someone else. So I don't know, one god may give them power over fire, another one may give them power over animals, another one may give them power over time or something like that, what have you.
Yeah.
Enchantment and charms or something. Yeah, Dim
It's
and the Storyteller.
basically it's basically a halfway between having a distinct power for each god and not having something at all. It's basically you can have the same domain for different gods, and then you have to only flesh out the domains.
Right. Yeah, Deadman the Storyteller says there was a book back in 2E, AD&D, Deities and Demigods. I remember there were actually two versions of that book because they got sued for using the Elric series gods, and they also used they also had a Cthulhu in there, and they were sued by the creators of the Elric and the whole Melibone. I can't remember the world.
Cthulhu is copyrighted?
No. They removed it for fear. It was a knee-jerk reaction. So they ended up re-releasing the book without that material in it because the Cthulhu IP isn't. I mean, it really was written by someone else, but it's legally it's been so long that it's now public domain. But at the time, they just were like, let's not even deal with it, and they just removed it. I mean, of course, this is well before things like OGLs and Dungeons and Dragons was already on a. Well, there was already a satanic panic, so they just felt like getting rid of it. But one of the things that I love about having the gods and having them be a little bit like having this weird misunderstanding is the fact that the gods may have agendas that the human lifespan, even if you have elves and dwarves that live a long time, may not encompass the goals of a deity. So, for example, they may want a group of parishioners or whoever to travel 1,000 miles to this distant land, only to be sent there and killed, because the deity may know that in 20,000 years, another group of people may discover them and make this religion flourish. The mortals involved in it may not understand the machinations behind the scene and may be given instructions that either might not make sense to them or seem rather bizarre,
or simply don't benefit themselves and maybe never will, which is a pretty hard thing for someone who follows a god, because we always have this certain buy-in that if you follow a god, then a god will take care of you somehow. That's should be a given for most people, that they think that at least, and that can be a hard thing to think when your god thinks much more farther than you and don't really care that much about you personally, maybe.
Right. Yeah. A large bit of this, my description of the difference between warlocks and clerics are service and power. So warlocks want the power, and as a side effect, they are basically forced to give service, whereas clerics serve, and as a side effect of their service, they gain power. Right? It's not that a cleric's like, wow, I can't wait to be wait to get storm powers. Hey, I think I might just worship this storm god. It's the worship of the storm god. And oh, by the way, there are some of you in this larger religion that have been chosen, or they show some sort of aptitude, or their religious fervor or something like that, their fanaticism or their dedication, and then they are granted these greater powers.
I think the big difference is also that warlocks are focused on themselves mostly, and clerics are focused on the community. They tend to be more lawful in general. There are chaotic religions, of course, but usually they feel a connection between other clerics of the same faith than them, and doesn't really necessarily have to be this thing with the warlocks. Even if you find someone who follows the same, how are they called again? Patron, then doesn't really mean that they have to be your ally necessarily.
Yeah. JP even mentions, easiest class to world build, the larger they grow their adherents, the more powers they get. Yeah, and the I guess the in-world rules would have to have some sort of established, working method. Do clerics gain power and level based on how large the
How many
power
people
of their
pray to
worship?
them? Yeah.
Right. Is it based on population? Is it based on devotion? Is it based on great works? Great works based on that particular religion? Is it based on faith? And that's one thing we're definitely going to talk about. Let's get into that now. Is the idea of faith in the sense that
Is faith the power source of the god?
right.
And that weirdly enough, that's something that a lot of systems now adopted, even though I can't recall that any religion ever said something like that.
Yeah, because normally you the mortal us has no particular impact on the power of the gods, right? It's us coming to them as opposed to humans powering the faith.
Yeah, I think it's try to find something why the gods are even interested in us. That's basically the explanation. So you have to take care of those because they are your power source somehow. I always found this a bit weird, to be honest. I mean, why do we have to understand why the gods do what they do?
Well, if we go to a more of a stereotypical Roman or Greek world, the gods were quite petty. They were fallible. They kind of exemplified human fallacies as well as human ideals. So I think it relates back to that where you had gods that were interested in their own domains and not much else outside of it. Um, and a lot of those stories of the gods told stories about human fallacy, right? Pride and um, uh, theft and jealousy and envy and those kind of things, and just wrap them into the gods themselves, and using the titles of some of the gods over and over again, those gods became the embodiment of mischief, or the embodiment of love, or the embodiment of beauty or something. And then, it could be, well, you're a very beautiful person, but you have to watch out because might become, very arrogant or narcissistic. And so I believe that, like, a lot of role-playing games makes the gods, they are not all powerful. They are not infallible, and they do have limitations. And so that's that could be a reason why the clerics have limitations as well.
Yeah, I still find it a bit weird, to be honest. I think I'm not sure if it was the first one, but Terry Pratchett had a huge influence on this thing. I think, where they basically, when enough people believe in something, it begins to exist. So there was the story where a dragon cult just called for a dragon all the time, and suddenly the dragon appeared because enough people believed in it. And that's the explanation a lot of people use nowadays, that simply because enough people believe in something, that starts existing. But it could also be that, as you told, it's the other way around. Maybe in a world where gods really exist and they really do stupid stuff, the domains are attacked onto them, even though they may not represent them completely.
Now, it could be very difficult if we're world building. It might be difficult to say. Let's say there's the god or goddess of the harvest, right? You know, does that mean that if the PCs travel 1,000 miles to some place that there are no harvests? I think that would be kind of difficult, you know, or god of the sea, like basically the ocean. The ocean doesn't have a terminus. It only extends as far as the people believe the ocean goes, which would be very um existential, like, you know, confusion where, you know, yeah, there are mountains, but there's nothing actually on the other side of the mountains until people see it first or believe there's something on that other side. That would be strange and weird, but kind of cool. But I think more practically, it might be the idea that maybe the clerics give purpose and rules to a world where without them it's out of control. So the clerics of the harvest know how to you know, they know how to farm and cultivate, you know, vegetables, whereas on the outer rim, all the plant life is like wild and man-eating and is poisonous and that kind of thing. And that's possibly where adventure comes from, where some of the conflict can come from as well.
We have a couple of comments already.
Yeah.
We should maybe go over them. Rickard said, especially as the players can be the focus of an exploration. The focus on the clerics who study following the lingering spirits of God rather than the gods themselves. Means and how they interact with the world. So basically that the gods are not really something personal, but an energy, and the interaction with this energy and how they explore what it's meant to be these gods is the interesting thing.
Yeah, and it maybe the spirits themselves. It may just not be spirits, but like these artifacts of the gods, not necessarily physical artifacts, but the this exploration to understand the fallout, I guess, of the gods and what's there.
And also, what Kiwi said is also really interesting. In some Spanish cultures, a person's spirit only exists as long as you are remembered. It's basically a collective willpower that keeps you there since you have no physical form. And I just remembered there are some practices like that in the Catholic Church also, where when someone is in hell, you can pray for them to get faster to heaven. So basically your devotion has an impact on the invisible world in some way. So you could also even pay people to pray for you when you don't have the time to pray all the time for your relatives.
You know, it's funny how in especially Dungeons and Dragons, when it comes to clerics, they're very singular individuals, not having very many mechanical connections to other people, but religion is very much concerned with a world beyond our own, the afterlife, tending for other people's souls, and the propagation of their own religious safety, or even peace, religion. You know, the hey, I just want to pray for other people to have a great life and such. And you know, in this world, it could be that the goal is not necessarily world expansion, but to ensure that their, you know, people sit by the right hand of their own gods or goddesses or spirits or something, and fighting for that, or which is where death rights come from, right? When someone passes away, you want death rites so that their passage becomes they go to a place that is most beneficial for them or their beliefs, and that they go there with all the things that they need, whether it's a full body or surrounded by their servants, or they go with a clean soul, or what have you, or all of the above, right?
There are mentions in the Bible, by the way, where there are angels for specific places which fight demons that linger there. So maybe the clerics are just something like soldiers in a war, and that's not really on this realm, but in a heavenly realm. So we see the indirect consequences. So if a demon conquers a specific place, maybe it gets corrupted and death, and they have to clean it again, so the celestial beings can conquer it again.
Now, you know, it's pretty easy for us to fall into like good and evil, you know, and then that whole argument, right? Celestial beings versus fiends, but
maybe just different gods could also be.
Yeah, because there's so many, like most, if not all, of the creatures in Dungeons and Dragons are from singular stories where the gods created them or a side effect created them. You know, the Titans you were taken down by the gods, and so then we have Titans in the game. Well, the Minotaur, the Gorgon, the Medusa, the Kraken, and all of these creatures were created by the gods for one purpose or another. Cerberus and those kind of things. So maybe that's where a lot of conflict comes in, where either during humanity's reign or a previous age or a battle of the gods that they created these things, and to prove their worth, the clerics have to defend their flock from these beasts that are from these other gods, and maybe that's where some of the conflict comes in. So not that other religions are evil, but they could, if your religion created minotaurs or something, or horses, or I don't know, the Medusa or something, right? You might find it offensive if these other groups of clerics are going around slaughtering minotaurs, you know. And sure, you're saying, well, yeah, they're bestial and they're evil, but they're also blessed by the gods. And so, you know, the dragon cult god doesn't want dragons killed, despite the fact that they also might not want dragons eating people, right?
I'm going through the comments currently again. Kiwi also said a god's power being based on collective will on all its believers also gives clerics a huge reason to go out and convert people, especially in a holy war. Fun stuff can come out of it. Yeah. There's basically an anecdote where I can prove you the other side too, because I had discussions in D&D that a preacher could basically kill gods. They just go out and convert all their believers so that they don't believe anymore in them, and that would kill the god. So you could basically build a god killer by being a preacher, which I find really weird.
But that's a thing, right? That is, I mean, in the context of role-playing games, that is a thing. You know, if you kill or convert enough worshippers of Thor away from Thor, that Thor will no longer exist, or at least have power, earthly powers. And so maybe there could be some kind of, you know, maybe there might be like a subsystem where there's a measurement of how many people there are. The only difficulty with that, whether you're measuring how many people believe in a religion, is that once it spreads to a large enough population, there's going to be it's going to be so large that there's no way for the player characters to actively get themselves involved in things. Although that might be where the tension comes from, right? A smaller group is easier to maintain and protect, whereas a larger group is more powerful but susceptible to outside sources. dangerous weather, natural predators, enemies, assassinations, disease, that kind of thing. So that would be an interesting metric to have, where if I'm just making it up. Like there's, what is it? Spells are level 1 through 9. So maybe there's like a 1 through 10 metric. 10 meaning that you've attained, divine godhood or something. So if your levels like 1 through 3, it's easy to protect your flock, but you start getting into 4 to 6, it's that people start wandering away and being distracted by things, or
I actually made a God RPG for some time ago, where I tried to emulate something like that, and it worked out kind of well. It was mostly for fun, though. Where you had basically a metric of how many believers you had, and that's your power level, and you had to fight other gods and stuff like that. Maybe this could be something like a GM mini game, similar to that thing what you do in Start Without Number between session, that you let the gods fight, and then you see what consequences this would have in the world. That would also be interesting, maybe.
Yeah, a dead man who always has so much knowledge. I do remember level 10 spells, he says, is the epic spells in 3E. I believe they even went higher than 10. But
yeah, they did.
Yeah, but
there are I think the level just stacks up again afterward, and you can build epic spells. Epic spells start at level 10. At spell level 10. I'm not sure how it's called in English. We call it Spellgrad, Zaubergrad.
Yeah. Foolish Kiwi says, like an ancient occult goddess kept barely alive, almost in a coma-like state, by a small few families of clerics or cultists for decades, until they slowly grow to a town as that dark power grows, and here retains his power. Oh, I'm seeing a lot of possibilities. Yeah, there could be, because of course we're talking about adventurers, right? Like, we want to shape these worlds, but we want there to be adventure. So there also could be of course there's always going to be the dark gods that are slumbering, and these small, like, so-called pagan, or at least pagan in the eyes of the individuals, the PCs, that are trying to awaken these beings. Although there could be a mission to awaken an ally of one of the gods, right? Like, Thor's right-hand man Loki is asleep, so we need to bolster the power of another god, which is kind of weird, but might be kind of interesting.
It should be the focus of the game that you interact somehow with the other world, and that you enable the gods. It's not really your fight; it's the fight of the gods, but you have your place in it. It's almost like you're a foot soldier in a giant war.
Yeah. I guess the idea for me, it would be juggling how much do the players know that they're in this war, right? Is it written on the front door, like, hey guys, you're in this mighty battle for followers or something, and go right ahead, or fighting the machinations of the gods? Or are they wandering around kind of aimlessly, and they stumble upon the fact that they are doing this?
There are methods to do this. I have a game called Houses of the Blooded, where the gods are basically able to communicate with their followers, and there are different grades of how easy it is to understand them, depending on how faithful you are. So basically, it's level 1 means you have some vague idea and maybe some dreams sometime. And if you get to level 5, which is stupidly hard in this game, you have to build a huge temple and get relics and stuff and shit, whatever. Then you can speak directly with them.
Yeah.
So you could have different grades depending maybe on cleric level or on your accomplishments, on how clearly the gods communicate with you. Maybe it starts with just an idea and you have to find out what they mean, and later on it may get clearer. Maybe you could even repurpose some spells that clerics have to that. I think there are spells where you can ask the god a yes/no question, and later you can communicate directly with them. So maybe you could use them to represent the influence of the gods, which is kind of already in the game, but it's weirdly used most of the time, I think, because it's usually focused on the players and not on the gods. The gods are not like, use this spell and I will tell you what I want to do. It's usually the cleric, okay, I want to do this. Is this a good idea? That's usually how it goes.
Yeah. Now, Prue mentions if a god gets 100% of a world's population of followers and they are devout, what would the god use their power for? And you know what? That's
conquering other worlds.
you know what? In many ways, you're absolutely right in the sense that what? You know, if you think about it a little too hard, it's like, well, it kind of makes sense that it doesn't make sense, you know? How many okay, in our world, there are people who are obsessed with being the richest person in the world, right? They've got enough money. We know that there are people that are rich in our world that have enough money that they literally do not need to work any longer. But what are they doing? They're competing against the next guy to be the richest person. For what purpose? Like there's nothing to gain but like the notoriety, and after you gain the notoriety, it'll just slip out your fingers anyway. So
it's a weird thing.
What?
Terry Pratchett also explored this in one of his books, which is focused on religion. They had gods which had a whole state devoted to him, where it's emulating the Catholic Church and the Vatican, and the weird thing is that nobody believes in him, even though there is a giant state devoted to him. Nobody really believes. They're just following the system. They don't really praise the god. And he basically had one idiot who was his only believer. That's why he could only manifest as a turtle.
That's funny. You know that I think the nuance of religion is quite overlooked. Just because it's very difficult to place numbers in it when it comes to belief in religion. Like you said, like there are so many people that they just go through the motions. They don't really believe. They just go through the motions, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's like, you know, there are many people that walk around and they go through. When people sneeze and I say God bless you, I don't know. Do I really believe that? You know, am I a hypocrite for doing that? No.
In Germany, we say Grüß Gott, which basically means God greets you, which is a normal greeting for us. And it's also, do we really believe it? But that's also a point of religion, I think, that it sometimes trickles into the subconscious, and you have to bring it up to the conscious in regular intervals. That's why we have Sunday celebrations and stuff like that, to remind people, hey, you should be religious from time to time. That's because we would forget otherwise.
Yeah, here and in many places in this city, although they've changed the law, there's no alcohol sales on Sundays, I believe up until like 2 p.m, and most businesses just don't sell alcohol on Sundays. Despite the fact that there's no law against it, no restrictions on it. There's just no alcohol sale as out of respect for religion on Sundays. Now, there could be many of those things that exist in the world, like everyone must throw a coin over the side of a ship before it sets sail. Something, right? Before you enter a building, you must rub the tummy of the Buddha before you walk into the door or what have you, or light an incense and bow your head 3 times before you take part in a meal or something. And those things may be very common. People just do them out of rote. If you're an outsider, you may not know, and people may think that you're going to, even if they don't believe, they're like, look, you need to do this because what if we're wrong? Right? There's a slight chance we might be wrong, and we do have clerics walking around with actual divine ability, so you might want to actually throw that coin over the side of the ship, please do it, because we don't want to get our ship capsized.
Maybe it even really is a small blessing, something like, hey, your next roll gets a 1d plus 1d4. You just don't know it.
Yeah, Foolish Kiwi says, oof, we can't buy alcohol on Sundays and there's no liquor stores and city limits here. You can definitely feel the Old West still lingering here. Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of communities that are like that where, because I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I grew up on the East Coast of United States, and it's extremely metropolitan. Like all those little things are gone. But now that I'm in central Ohio, a little more Midwestern, there's a lot of those older, wives' tale's the wrong word, but it's the rote of doing something because it's always been done that way, and a lot of it is has a religious background.
We have this in Germany too. In the village I lived before, there was basically a divide inside the population between people who go to church and people who drink alcohol. Because if you drink alcohol, you are not allowed in church. You used to be not allowed in church, and that's why people who are Christians and drink alcohol have a really hard time nowadays, especially youngsters. So it's a weird thing. You wouldn't be allowed to drink alcohol inside the church at all, even if there are festivities inside and stuff like that. And it's super weird.
So now I'm gonna let's segue a little bit into thinking of this particular subject, but let's segue into a bit of faith, right? It's one of the things that that the Greek and Roman gods have been known for are it's the fist in the air, right? And a number of religions have this too, where you have people who are believers or non-believers that are like throwing their fist into the air of the gods and cursing them and fighting with them and resisting their pull and being told to do things that they don't want to do. And that's something that's not really delved into in a role-playing setting, but I think would be very interesting world building.
But I already have some. Oh, hello, are you still there?
Yeah.
In the Dark Eye, each of these specific blessed ones has rules, very strict rules they have to follow, and they even have a god. I tried to play him once, where you are not allowed to take ambushes and not allowed to lie, even indirectly. And I tried to play one of these characters, and other players hated me for it. Because the restrictions are so strict. But its interesting thing is it also has some unforeseen boons to have these restrictions and everyone knowing that you have these restrictions. If you're playing a cleric of this god, he's called Prios, nobody expects you to lie. So whenever you say something, they can't just tell, oh, he's lying, so you must be telling the truth. So if you want to convince someone of that you are telling the truth, then having a guy like this with you is pretty helpful.
Right. I mean, like you said, you would automatically be even someone who is adamantly against what you're doing would believe what you're saying. Like you would be this truthful individual, and if they questioned you, like I'm just making an example, like are there any people hiding in the woods surrounding us, and you said no, they would probably take you at face value, like, oh, okay, well, there are no other people in the woods. Now, is it possible that it's true? You know, that would really surprise them, instead of going, no, they're probably lying. Send some scouts to go into the forest to see if there's anyone out there. You know what I mean? And embracing those limitations, those religious limitations, is something that's not really seen very much. Vows of silence, or always telling the truth, or walking barefoot.
They exist partially. And I think in 3.5 you could take feats which are vows specifically, vows of non-violence or of poverty and stuff like that, and they give you really huge boons, to the point where it doesn't really matter that you took them. The vow of poverty gave you such stupidly high bonuses because you couldn't wear any equipment anymore. So they had to basically give you the bonuses you would normally get from equipment from this feat alone, which is super stupid and defeats the purpose, in my opinion, but okay. Right. And I think that that's really something you could make. You could also make something like a minor power for each god, which is independent from each domain, which maybe comes with these special limitations. Maybe you have a sun god and you are not allowed to cast your spells at night, but at day they are more powerful. That could be a pretty huge limitation, but in some situations it might be helpful. That's another tactical aspect you have to consider.
Right. Now, classically, of course, player characters are allowed to pick their spells. They cast some spells. Long and short of it, they get to do what they want. And that might be a push and pull in the world, right? And so instead of limiting when a player could use their magic, I don't mean daylight or nighttime. I'm talking about being told how to use their powers. Maybe the players are able to use their powers. Ooh, it looks like I'm frozen. There we go. Maybe the players are able to use when let's say this. If they use them, if they commit the sin of their religion. So a sin of their religion, let's say there's a fire god and they need to put the fire out to hide from enemies searching for them in the woods. And the cleric's like, no, if we light a fire, we naturally let that fire go out on its own, if at all, right? We don't put fires out. And the PCs, the rest of them are like, no, we got to put the fire out, splash some water on it so we can hide. Maybe there's some kind of a change in what happens to them. I never particularly liked the idea of like clerics and paladins, the minute they do something wrong, they just lose their powers. But I do like the idea of being converted.
You have to struggle, I think. That's the important thing here. If you just lose your powers and then, well, that's it. It's not really interesting, but having to guess what you God wants and maybe not being sure yourself, that's a hard stuff.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go from 0 to 60. That's just a thing. I don't know why players and GMs in so many parts of role-playing games just go, oh, you violated your oath, you automatically lose your powers, paladin, or something like that. You know, your clerical powers don't work. I think it would be better to have them, because there would be so many different gods that they get recruited. So, for example, you're playing a god of light and life, and the DM says, okay, one of the spells you have now is the darkness spell. You can pick anything else you want, but one of your spells has to be darkness. So in effect, you're not limiting what they're doing, you're just changing their capabilities. And that could be a slow method for some of the other gods to start to convince them to their side. And the other thing would be, maybe those are missions. There could be this eternal loop of going on quests to atone for what they've done. And the atonement itself is the quest, right? So instead of like, oh, my character has to atone, and everyone's just rolling their eyes because they think it's stupid, maybe in this world, the constant battling against our own human nature versus what the gods want, the atonement is always traveling somewhere, performing some kind of mission or quest, or defeating some great creature, or traveling to some great land, or erecting a monument or what have you.
But you could also make something like conversion more interesting. I had this situation in my Dungeon World campaign, actually, where one of the players was following a god which was pretty useless. He invented it himself just because he thought it was funny, called a fluff. And one of the other players, I gave him the opportunity to kill an archangel of the fluff, because he wouldn't do anything to defend the realm they are currently in against the enemy they are fighting. And I gave the other player, the druid, the ability to kill this archangel with the help of some other archangel monster. And she did it, and which resulted into some really intense, really cool role playing, because she got new powers, and he also had the decision to either make up a new character or convert to a different faith afterwards, because he couldn't just say, okay, my friend killed an archangel of my god, I'll just forgive him. That wouldn't work. that wouldn't be interesting. So he switched to another religion and changed completely afterwards, which is also interesting. And I also saw in a campaign about Shadowrun that one of the players switched their totem, which is also something like a religion in the systems if you want so. And the other totem basically said, hey, if you switch to me, I will help you in this situation and save your friends in this, and that's why you should convert to me. And that's also something interesting, being having something like, hey, if you could you switch to me, I will help you out, guy, no problem.
Yeah, that would be that'd be kind of cool. Like you have the in the situation, it helps them out. The PC returns back to back home, and how do you explain that to all your parishioners who you just convinced to I don't know, you worship the god of blue and then you change to the god of red when you come back and they're like, wait, what? That what are we supposed to do now? And I mean, I suppose you could imagine all the clerical powers. In Dungeons and Dragons, there are schools of magic, right? Evocation, necromancy.
Yeah.
You could make spell lists, and those powers apply to specific gods. And there's nothing preventing you from picking those abilities. But what happens is it is like it's not a gamble. It's more like you're constantly asking for favors. And the more favors you ask of one, the more upset the other ones get at you. You know what I mean?
So
And
something like a polytheistic cleric.
Yeah, there could be a pantheon of gods, and the gods aren't, maybe the gods aren't, it's not good or evil. It's more like we want to be the top dog. And so when you get put in these positions where, yes, my initial god is the god of fire, but now we're on the open ocean and I need to beseech the god of the sea, that the god of the sea is like, yeah, I've got another one, but the god of fire is like, you kind of put me on the back burner back there. You're gonna have to make this up for me, please. And
this would be super interesting. Maybe you could switch your domain doing that, maybe having a quest each time and stuff like that. That would be super sweet.
Right. And maybe it's not live or die, good or evil. Maybe it's this constant tug and pull because the gods need humanity that much. So yeah, it could be there could be some of that involved in it, where the guy's like, please, no, you don't want to do that. You want to stay on my side and stuff. Or maybe they're just petty. Maybe they just turn their back on you every once in a while. Like your original god is the god of fire. You beseech the god of the sea, so you go underwater. You come back, and the god of fire is like, I don't want to speak to you. You've got maybe in a couple of days, and you're like, no, I want my fire.
There are stories, the classical stories like that, where Poseidon sends Odysseus on this quest because he wasn't nice to. I think he killed one of his children. And that's it. Could even be that the other gods are basically sending the monsters the players have to fight. Yeah. While you follow one of the quests of the other god.
So many creatures were created by the gods, right? Like Medusas and Minotaurs and things. And maybe those creatures have always been held at bay due to belief. So you have a major city, the people believe that they won't be harmed by snakes. The snakes never come into the city. Everything works out, okay? But as the PCs travel around, their lack of devotion is creating hazards for the people back home. And that may have to bring them in this constant cycle of traveling outwards and coming back home, traveling outwards and coming back home, and balancing their relationship with the gods. So to keep the snake god away, they need to, they need to maintain their level of devotion to the snake to appease the snake god.
I can already see the relationship charts between the gods.
Yeah. Oh man, it would be so complicated. And then and so the PCs are like, no, well, if I do this one thing, I need to in the short term, I need to go to the god of cold, but in the long term, I need to keep the god of snakes away from my city. But then on the other hand, the god of the harvest needs to do this thing, and there could be this like it's not necessarily a war, a physical war that people are battling, but it's more like there's a status quo that everyone's comfortable with, and the PCs are the ones that are turning things, uh, flipping the head, if you will, of the world, and the 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 gods are the ones that are like not punishing, but they're going, hey, listen, you're the one that decided to to leave my protectorate, so that's on you. That's why there are snakes and rats coming into the city, or that's why the Minotaur is hunting you down because you decided to leave my protection or something like that. And it could be very very seductive, right? Hey, if you want to resist the Minotaur, all you have to do is just come back to me. It's just a simple trade,
You could even have something like that different emotions are currently in a god. You could roll which emotion the god currently has based on the emotion he had before, and then have random charts on what he would do. Maybe there are so many interesting ideas that could come out of this. We have to read the chat a bit, I think. The Prue said, apparently a god plan doesn't cover this kind of accident. My god's plan does, just saying. Oh man.
Oh,
Salespersons. Oh man.
oh, I could feel the pain now. It's like walking into an auto dealership. You're just rolling your eyes as someone comes over to you, and you're like, "So, what are you looking for? Believe me, it's always affordable. I can absolutely positively find the car that you need. If you just come right over here, fill out this paperwork, and here, let me take."
There would absolutely be a god which makes contracts with concrete things you have to do each day. So something like you have to spend 3 coins from 1% from what you find in this quest, and you have to donate this there and there and there, and oh shit.
That would be awesome. But so yeah, we really tried to steer in this vlogcast or whatever, tried to steer away from the religious wars. I think this seems far more fun in a world where clerical powers are and clerics are the most influential, to have a strangely introspective battle going on. Do I maintain my faith? Do I switch my faith? How am I being seduced to another side? Being told to do things that might go in opposition to what humanity would wish. I remember bringing up the idea of the harvest, where the king says to burn the harvest because it's the right thing to do to keep the enemy at bay, but the people who believe in the god of the harvest, tells them to stop working in the fields to feed the people until until the king changes their mind or something. Just being told to travel or atone for something that the PCs may not want to involve themselves with. Feeding your enemies, or traveling 1,000 miles away when you really want to stay home to defend your realm or something.
There could be some interesting tension here, because you could also involve something like that the gods use their powers to help you. So for example, if you have the god of the harvest saying, hey, you have to feed your enemies, but you realize that if you do that, you don't have anything to eat for yourself, and you still do it, maybe the god will bless the harvest in a way that you would still be able to feed yourself afterward, but only if you do it without thinking that would happen.
Yeah, I mean, so much of religion is about like doing something and then not knowing what the end result will be, but that if without your faith or devotion, that it's pretty much death or worse. right? It's the please walk to the enemy without any weapons and just ask the enemy to put down, to stop, right? And oh, by the way, if you're faithful, I'll protect you. It's the idea of there's no food for us to eat. There's no, the water is poisoned and there's no food or whatever. And your faith is telling you, well, don't worry about it though. Just don't
Just
don't worry
wait.
about it. I'll make sure you're covered, and not knowing if that's going to happen or not. Um, Unfortunately, just because it is a role-playing game, when you pick spells like curing wounds or create food and water, you're already predetermining your clerical influence, as opposed to I'm going to pray to see if I have this thing and seeing if it happens or not.
Yeah.
Now, you could mechanize it where every time you cast a spell, like this is what I want to do, and you make your Arcana check or Religion check or something of in whatever game you're playing, and you make the check, and if you fail it, it doesn't happen. Not because you chose it and you failed to make the roll. It's you asked for it and it wasn't granted to you. So part of that has to be very much a buy-in. Because at one time I played a cleric, had the healing and the channeling and stuff, and I didn't have enough healing. Mechanically, I didn't have enough healing to heal all the people, so I could heal like one or two people. And in the game, you lay on hands, you cure wounds or something, and it's no big deal. But my character took it as being pissed off because the god didn't give me the power to heal everyone and force that choice on me. Like, who do I heal when you see 13 people bleeding and dying? Who lives or dies? And so my character took it as an affront. Like, wow, you're going to give me the power to heal, but not everyone? Like, that's being a bastard, right? Why wouldn't you just heal everybody? Don't worry about me. What about everybody else? So it's a weird way of thinking about it, but there would have to be some kind of buy-in when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, and there's also an interesting aspect in the Dark Eye. When you're casting spells, you're basically channeling divine energy through yourself, and there's this thing that you basically get high from that, which is super weird because you basically get celestial features doing that after a while. So you become more close. You look more closely like your god, and if you cast spells constantly all the time like that, you can even get addicted to that. It's super weird, and you can get super powerful if you cast a lot of spells in a short amount of time.
But I like that though. I like from an outsider, you might find it strange or debilitating, but clerics don't feel that their service in any way is a limitation to them. So if you grow horns or gain a halo or your skin turns blue or your presence smells like, I don't know,
Incense.
sulfurs, incense or something, like your footsteps leave black marks on the ground or what have you, like all those things, they wouldn't consider that to be a limitation, right? They would consider that to be a point of pride. So gaining the features of your god would be awesome. I actually brought that up in the Absolute Tabletop group, Facebook group, about adding in like LBGT or quilt bag elements. And I said, what if when you channel your god, you become their sex, their sexual orientation, temporarily, but you would become them. You as a person wouldn't think that would be strange or odd, right? That would be a goal for you. And
yeah, you would basically become a different person in the moment you're channeling your energy. You would forget who you actually were and forget yourself in a way, which is an interesting concept because maybe you get addicted to it, maybe you get afraid of it after a while. So holy shit, what happened to me there? I lost myself, and that's maybe scary for some people also.
Yeah. Your family and friends and community want you to maybe they desire the real you to be here, but you want to be this other person, this other divine creature or spirit, or you want to achieve divinity, you want to rise above, but the people are like, no, come back to me. Prue says, like rage with devotion. Yeah. We didn't really mention other character classes, but I imagine those other character classes could be flavored with religion. So a barbarian might not just have
He had
regular rage, but they
he
are enraptured with their rage. There is a version of a religious barbarian. I don't remember the archetype.
Yeah, there's always a combination with every combination of classes. There's always oh man, how it's called, subclass somehow.
Yeah.
And
There is a religious subclass in I want to say it's Xanathar's Guide and Unearthed Arcana, which is a religious fanatic barbarian. But all the character classes could be flavored religiously, like
the
zealot.
thing is, we don't really need to do that, though.
It's
the only
true.
thing we wanted to do with this world building is finding a way to see how a world would work where clerics are the dominant thing. And if the gods are so prevalent in the world, then we would need the clerics to even make sense of it all. The other classes would serve the clerics no matter what, because they have the power in this world. They are the people who talk to the gods. They are the people who understand what's going on. And without them, we would all be doomed.
That's true. It would be to end this. You mentioned making sense of the world, and what if this world is bordered by a maelstrom of sorts, almost pure chaos, and if it wasn't for devotion to the gods, that there wouldn't be any sense in the world, and those things from the outside keep creeping into society, towards civilization, and if it wasn't for the clerics and their clerical powers, they wouldn't be able to make sense of the world. And there are a number of gods and godlike beings, because just as a mortal, we can't make sense of everything, so we have to pick one thing to lay our flag down. So instead of religious wars, maybe it's like religious exploration to keep the chaos at bay, right?
There could also be something that the gods are simply the one force that protects humanity from these evils. And there's also the concept in the Dark Eye that each of the 12 main gods has an opposite archdemon.
Okay.
That they basically, the goddess of love has the opposite, the archdemon of sexual perversion, for example. That each of them has one of these demons as an opposite, and maybe they're just protecting from these other forces. It doesn't have to be demons, but maybe it's manifestations of chaos or whatever. They're opposite to the gods. They're enemies.
Yep. All right. Well, we went well past an hour. I've got to go to work. But I love these world building things, just talking about clerics and religion and how it fits into the game. Of course, us trying to stay as far away from real world religion. These are role playing games. It's not something to get triggered over. It's just a way for us to explore ideals of various religions. And so I just think it's an opportunity for us to delve into it. And I think a world where you have those great powers would be awesome. It would be pretty cool. Now, lastly, I would just say that if you're a game master and you're running a world like this, to not presuppose what is right or wrong. Just get together with your players and decide on what are the so-called sins of this world. And in that way, it leaves lots of choice, so that the players don't feel like they're being pigeonholed into, oh, if you don't do this thing, you're automatically going to be punished. Instead, just putting out a bunch of obstacles rather than punishments.
But you should always make it interesting, these types of limitations. You shouldn't just say, do something which you would do nonetheless. Throwing a coin before you travel in a shrine is maybe not that huge of a deal if you make 1,000 coins per quest. So make something that creates conflicts and makes stuff interesting. That's the important thing here.
Yeah, I love that idea of feeding your enemies, and trying to come about how you're going to do that if you choose to do it, and will your enemies trust you? You know, they may refuse it, and you know, are you done with that? Are you done with the mission, or will the god say, no, you really have to feed them? And you're like, well, no, they refuse. They don't trust us, and that in itself might be a mission. So I like those tough choices. I like hashing out tough choices within game as opposed to just saying, well, this is what it's going to be, and then coming to the very end without actually exploring it. So Vince, please take us out before we get out of here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us with this discussion. I think tomorrow we have to look a bit more on the chat. I think we talked a bit too much with ourselves. It's still cool talking about these things, and to be honest, every 3 of the worlds we created, I want to play in kinda. So it's a good sign, I think. Tomorrow is the Druid, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so we already talked about the Druid in our Barbarians episode a bit. So keep with us, and good day.
Hey, all right, everyone, have a good one. I'll see you later. All right.